Welcome! My name is Kelly Anderson, and this is Fanimated, the animation fan podcast where we get a chance to geek out about our favorite animated media. Today, Laura Wacker-Hansen and Kate Callan join me in discussing the 2010 live-action remake of the successful Avatar: The Last Airbender series. And although this film is notoriously dismissed by die-hard fans of the original, Laura has a compelling case for why The Last Airbender deserves more credit. I am so excited to share this conversation with you, but first I want to thank the Fanimated crew over on Patreon. This episode was voted on by our patrons, and you can vote for upcoming episode topics for only $1 a month over at patreon.com/Fanimated. We also recently reached our first support goal, and I want to thank all of our patrons individually. So thank you to Bryn, Deb, Emma, Josh, Megan, Perry, and Nathan for making this podcast possible. We couldn't do this without you. Now keep in mind that we go into spoiler territory for The Last Airbender about 10 minutes in, so if you're ready, let's get started and let's get animated.
I am great, Kelly. How are you?
I am so excited to be talking about The Last Airbender, and I never thought that I would say that.
I am really excited to talk about it with you. I'm excited for this whole process.
Yes. So, of course, I've been rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix, and it brought up this conversation with us of, the remake, the live-action remake. And you completely shocked me by saying that you enjoy the film.
Yes. I actually will caveat what you said by saying I don't think it's fair to call it a remake. I think it is an interpretation of the story of Airbender, and that I saw the live-action film first. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, took me to the theater to see it because he had loved Avatar: The Last Airbender. He owned the series, had watched it multiple times. He's like, let's go see this movie. And I saw it in the theater, really enjoyed it, and was very confused about the fact that my husband was not happy with it, that the general interpretation was that it was awful and that they weren't going to make the subsequent films. I was extremely confused. And then even after going back, so after watching it, my husband's like, well, you have to come back and you got to watch the series. And I watched the series, and as someone who watched it in that order, I was still very confused about why it got so much hate. And then rewatching the series now, because even though we own the DVDs, for some reason, having it be on Netflix means I have to stream it through Netflix, even though I own the whole thing on DVD.
Right.
And then, so I started restreaming that, and then I finished the first book, Water, and I just thought, well, I should go back and watch the live action. So I had the first book fresh in my head, and then went and watched book 1, Water, of the live action film, and was still extremely confused. I can absolutely see some of the things that people said they didn't like about it. I can see that, but there were a lot of things that I think people were a little too harsh, didn't give credit to the screenwriters and the filmmakers for perspectives that I have now that, I've had some really cool opportunities over the last year to get involved with some independent filmmakers and writers in the Twin Cities, and kind of understanding the process of screenwriting a little bit more.
Yes.
And then on top of that, just the basic idea of what is the underlying story, and does one medium own a story? How many ways, you can tell a story a lot of different ways. You can tell a story through a book, you can tell a story through a movie, you can tell a story through an illustration, through animation, through oral history, through a stage play. And is one really better than the other if at the essence the story is the same?
Yes.
So.
That is so good. And I'm so excited that you brought this up to me and that you actually enjoy the film and have, while we've talked, you've brought out some really great points about it. And For those who don't know, and I have a whole episode on Avatar: The Last Airbender where I talk about that with Emma, but basically my history with the series is I was 11 years old when the show aired. I was a complete fan. It was one of the first television shows that actually had like deeper themes and continuity that I experienced and engaged with. And so as a huge fan, I didn't even go to see The Last Airbender in theaters because I immediately heard it was terrible, so I didn't even go. And years later, I rented it, and I kid you not, I don't even know if I got through 5 minutes of it, and I turned it off. Like, this film was so at odds with the series that I remembered that it was hard for me to keep going. And so what Laura has proposed is that I need to actually watch it, and I need to actually come at it with a view of like, this is a different interpretation, like you said. So we're going to do that.
Yes. So, Kelly, I am going to give you a few things to think of while we're watching this together. Okay. And if our listeners are potentially interested in doing the same thing, these are things that I would challenge our listeners who are fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender and have some hate for the film to think of. I didn't caveat this at the beginning. Fandom, don't at me. Like... This is my opinion. So,
Fanimated is a place for all fans of animation. Yes. Casual fans and fandom people as well. I love all of you.
So, here are a few things to keep in mind before we start watching, and we'll talk about a few things while we're watching as well. 1, a feature film is between 2 and 3 hours long. Book 1 has 12 hours of content.
Yikes.
You're going to have to cut some content to make it a film. Mm-hmm. Which, ask yourself before you watch the film, what is the true through line of book 1? What are we learning? Second part of that will be, how do you not only communicate story, but do some world building? So you have 2 hours to communicate a 12-hour storyline and 12 hours worth of backstory and world building.
Yes.
Third, remember that this film was made with the anticipation of making 3. So just because something didn't happen in the first film does not mean that it wasn't going to happen later, particularly character development. Without giving too much away, I think one of the big backlashes that people had was certain people's favorite characters went very underdeveloped in this first film. Mm-hmm. But remember, there were 2 more films. Think about who the important characters are, when they have a chance to develop, and maybe why they picked certain characters to develop in a certain way. That's what I'm going to challenge you with before we talk too much about other things that I think we'll talk about after, some of the things that I really appreciate about the film. And then finally, I will say, as a fan of animation, this film has a lot of CGI and a lot of really cool special effects. So keep that in mind as well. Don't freak out, people. I actually think it's very clear that book 1 did not have as much money as book 2 and 3 in the animated series. There's a lot of very rough backgrounds. And one of the things I think is really cool is the amount of life that's breathed into the backstory of book 1 through the really, really detailed world building. So that's what I was saying.
That is awesome and makes me so excited. And again, so I'm going into this with I've only watched like 2 minutes of it previously, and I have done some research to get ready for this episode, which actually makes me more excited to watch it because I didn't realize how many awesome people were involved with this film. But other than that, I tried to avoid reading even more critiques of it because in my research, that's all there is, it seems like, is just critiques and reviews that don't have good things to say, which we will address after we go watch it. So, with all those caveats and where we're coming from, Laura and I and Kate.
Hi.
Kate's here too. We're going to watch the film, we're going to come back, and we're going to tell you what we think. And Kate, have you seen it before?
I have never seen the movie. I've only seen snippets of the series.
So
I know the basic story. Mm-hmm. That's it.
So you're a completely new person. You're
brand new.
Neutral, you would say.
I am Swiss.
She is Swiss about Avatar.
Swiss about Avatar. Awesome. Okay, great. Well, I'm so excited. We're going to go watch it real quick. Real quick. A couple hours. We'll be back, and we'll give you our thoughts. Okay, we're back. We have just watched The Last Airbender. Kate and Laura are here with me, and we have so many thoughts. So, first off, in the briefest of terms, tell me one thing that you absolutely love and one thing that you wish was different about the film. Kate.
Okay.
And again, you have never seen the series and you have never seen the movie. This is you're the neutral party coming in as you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. So, what did you like?
I liked a lot. I thought a lot of the CGI was really cool. I like kind of how they, particularly in regards to kind of the worlds and the distinctiveness of each of the realms. I thought that was really cool, kind of how they made it all look so like lived in and elaborate and lush at the same time. I thought that was really cool. I thought the water effects were kind of cool. And having only seen kind of bits and pieces of the animated series, I can see kind of, okay, yeah, this is the like CGI version of what was in the animated series. Things that I didn't like, I thought that the dialogue was just really clunky at times. I thought sometimes, and Laura, you and I have talked about this in watching like other things at times too. It felt like some of the lines the actors had a hard time kind of delivering in a natural way. And I, sometimes I kind of accredit that to just like clunky writing. But yeah, I mean, overall, I thought I enjoyed watching it, having like no context whatsoever.
Yeah, that's great. And I really, really value your input as we were watching to see how understandable or not all of that exposition was for someone who wasn't going in already knowing all of that stuff like I was. And so,
I had to make sure that I was like, is this just like exposition that we haven't gotten to, or am I just not paying close enough attention? And most of the time I think the answer was, it was just exposition we haven't gotten to yet.
Kate also doesn't always pay the best attention when
we're watching I did not look at my phone when we were watching it, though. Okay, I wanted to make sure that I was paying really close attention.
And the other thing that I will say is that Kelly and I were stopping and talking about a lot of stuff, so I think we also may have been confusing Kate a little bit with like adding things and saying things that was like, if we had just let her watch the film, it may have made a little more sense.
Yes. If you could name just like, because I know you have a lot of thoughts, but just to summarize all of our viewpoints, what was one thing or one collective thing that you really enjoy, and what is one thing you wish was changed?
I loved the world building, and because I can only say one thing, I will say that includes characters. The storyline, I think, is part of the world because there's like a religious aspect to it, and just the creation of the world in which the story is going to happen. I thought the CGI was great. I loved the choreography. I loved the costumes. I loved all of the set designs. I thought that was really, really cool. One thing that I didn't like or that I maybe would have changed. I agree that some of the dialogue was very clunky, and I feel like there were certain cinematic elements that were paying homage to different styles, but the film as a whole wasn't filmed in like that style, and it made it a little odd for the viewer. So I thought that they were trying to potentially draw on too many styles to make the film, and that made it a little weird because they departed from the style of the animated series.
Right.
And then, but didn't land on like, this is this interpretation specifically. They used like a lot of different elements, and it got a little bit like, what's happening?
Jumbled.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's definitely put a pin in that and come back to that for sure, because the style of how it was directed is very different from the animated series, and is a little bit jumbled, as I think a lot of it is. So one thing I think, like the biggest thing that I really loved about this film is getting to watch, like, just what a live action does is getting to watch these characters interact in a real world, even though granted it is all very CGI, but watching, the biggest impact to me was watching Aang go around in his glider. I was like, it's his glider, but it's like real. It's so cool, you know? Like, that was my fan nerddom moment of, this is really cool to see, like, as a live action interpretation. There are several things, obviously, that I wish were different, but I think the biggest drawback to me and this was definitely a choice with the film that we will talk about, but the choice to make it less humorous. This film was directed as more of a dramatic, epic fantasy, rather than the humor that is found in the show that I, still will rewatch and like laugh out loud at, and so I miss a lot of that. So, as we go forward, like, again, I'll try not to be super, super down on it, because obviously there are a lot of things that a lot of listeners, I'm sure, already know, who are fans of the series, that they wish could be different, and that a lot of people don't like. As we mentioned before, this is one of the least liked live action remakes ever, and just like the enormous backlash that this film got caused it to not get to make the 2 sequels that would have followed it. And so in this episode, we are exploring why maybe that was not fair, and why The Last Airbender deserved to finish its trilogy.
Let's start with a discussion about the difference between a film and a series. I don't think that it's fair to call this a live action remake of a series. It is a film version of a story. The way that you have to look at this, the way that someone making a film version of a book would make a film version. Sometimes they stick very closely to the story, and they're able to do that in the time allotted. Sometimes they're not. I've seen film adaptations of books that went completely off the rails. This has nothing to do with animation, but a really good example of this is The Tourist. I don't know if you guys have seen that film or read that book. It's an spy intrigue novel that I really, really loved. My mom and I loved it, and they made a film with Angelina Jolie and Johnny Depp, and they literally took the setting, the character names, and the title of the book and completely rewrote the whole thing. And then I've seen other things like Lord of the Rings, where they stay very, very close to the storyline, but even with really well-made stories turned into movies, you have to cut stuff out. Kate and I were laughing about, Lord of the Rings is a phenomenal example of taking a story and turning it into a screenplay for the screen, but who doesn't love Tom Bombadil? Like, he's one of the best characters. Is he important? No.
No, not necessarily.
Was I sad that he wasn't? If this was a series where I had 12 hours of content, then you could have him in there. But when you're trying to make a movie, you have to decide what the true storyline is. The storyline is not everything that happens around the storyline. It is the through line of a series. So the way that I like to think of it is, think of like a line. So you've got a straight line going across the horizon. That's the through line of a story. That's the Avatar story, is a straight line that goes from episode 1 to the final episode of book 3. And everything that happens, because it's a series, is like a squiggly line that goes up and down, and around this line, and then ends. It starts at the beginning, it squiggles back and forth across this line, it crosses it, it pulls it in, and then it ends. So all that stuff is based around the main storyline, but it is not essential for the main storyline. And I think that that's where people get angry when series get made into smaller, condensed stories, because your favorite part of a story may be something that's way up on that squiggly line. It isn't on the through line of the story.
Right.
And just because that was something that you liked the most, or that was a character that you liked the most, doesn't actually make it an essential part of the through line essence of the story that they're trying to tell.
Absolutely. Exactly. And like you said, the book 1 has 12 hours of content.
Yeah.
All condensed into like a little under 2 hours. And they focus on that through line. So it is no longer a new village every episode, season 1, and new characters, new story, new all of those things. And they have to condense it all down. And what I noticed watching it was, like Laura said, we were stopping and pausing, and I was throwing things out like, oh, this is, because again, like I am so deeply connected to these characters, and seeing them portrayed differently is hard, and I think is hard for any adaptation of any other medium into any other medium. But then at the end, I was like, oh, I should just be quiet and watch it, because at the end I was like, they did have a through line, and they were like reaching to a point. So they were focusing on the struggle that Aang does have in the show too, of just of grieving, of loss, dealing with his emotions, and dealing with the fact that he is the Avatar and having to come to terms with and accept that part of himself. And I think the way that it was done on screen and in this adaptation was absolutely beautiful, because like he actually, like with the bowing of everyone, like in the movie, Aang, when he is told that he's the Avatar, and this is different than the series, everyone at the temple bows to him, and he doesn't bow back, and he runs away. And then at the end of the film, he saves the Northern Water Tribe, and they all bow to him and are like, we need the Avatar, we need you. And Aang is still very apprehensive about it, but he bows back. And I thought that was a really, really beautiful visual image that we don't get in the series. And as well as him dealing with his emotions, and Laura mentioned this as we were watching, it's like, this movie is showing that you have to deal with your emotions, and that like makes you more powerful, like shoving them under the rug, like that inhibits you, and it inhibits your abilities. So there was a through line, and granted, I think it could have been streamlined a little bit, but if they streamlined it even more, there would be more things people would be upset about not being in it. And I think another point to make about remakes is you don't want a shot-by-shot comparison to an original, because then it just turns into the Lion King remake, which I do not love at all. And
what's the point?
Because what's the point? What's the point? And this, like, you want to bring something new into it, breathe, like stay grounded in the original source material, but bring in something new enough and bring in something else that makes it fresh. And I would argue that this film does that.
Absolutely. I think another thing, that we had kind of talked about is, what is your motivation for making another film? Kate had asked, is the motivation for making a live action of an animated series just money? And kind of Kelly's initial reaction was yes.
Yes.
But I think that there's another piece to that. I think a good example of that would be there are certain books that have been made into movies over and over and over, and they get remade not only because, yes, people will go see them because they're beloved stories, but I think that a director and a writer has motivation to, what can this story tell us about us, us now? Why do we need to remake this now? How is it speaking to the audience now? Good examples include Little Women.
Yep.
We just talked about Little Women and how that story Kate and I just watched it and talked about it. And that how that story, every 15 or 20 years, another big version of that story is told. And it's because how, this different parts of the story speak to society at different times. They speak to maybe, a version of the story resonated with a certain audience, but there's someone else who had read it and thought, this other part of the story is what resonated with me. Interpretations of the stories can say different things. You see that with Jane Austen books. How many times has Pride and Prejudice been turned into a movie?
Right.
With different versions of those characters, different things that are important. And so I think that when you look at this, why was this made? It's clear to me that the intended audience of this film was not the fandom of the animated series.
Yes.
It was M. Night Shyamalan saying, my kids won't stop talking about this, watching it with them, and clearly having a different reaction to the story than his children were having. Which speaks to how well the animated series is written, is that different ages and different audiences can pull different things. And I think this film is a more adult lens on the basic story. I think that, Kelly, you were talking about dealing with your emotions. I think you always do a spoiler alert at the beginning of this. Spoilers if you haven't seen the animated series of Avatar. But that at the end of the day, every single character goes through a dealing with their emotions arc.
Yes.
That is, Zuko has to deal with the fact that he needs to learn to be able to bend without anger.
Right.
That's why he was able to master his firebending, because he was drawing on anger. Katara has the same thing. She doesn't deal with the death of her mother.
Yes.
All of these people are not dealing with over and over and over. Every character's strength comes from, and it's one of the reasons that the characters are tweens coming of age, because that's part of growing up, right? Is becoming an adult, feeling an adult feelings, and learning how do I deal with these feelings in a healthy way. And that is manifested through this physical bending, and that's an expression of who I am and my emotions. And that's, as an adult watching the series, that's very clearly the essence of the story that he took, and that the writers decided, I think this is what this story is really about, and I want to make a version of this that tells this story, pays homage to the world that was built, but I think we can do it a little differently to make a different audience like the story.
Absolutely. And going back to, why do you make a live action? You have something specific to say about the material that's brought out. And this just goes back to, I struggle with my words right now because I'm just so at a loss for, man, I really wish we would have gotten the whole trilogy. I wish we could have seen what else he was going to focus on in these live action films, going forward. I feel like, and this is a big, big thing that we talked about while we were watching it, and I think is the biggest thing to remember. And from someone who watched it as a child and has those nostalgic feelings towards it, to be truthful, the entire first season is setting it up, is the exposition. The whole first season is explaining who these characters are and what the world is. And that's what they did with the film, is this film is exposition. But you can't fault it for that because that's exactly what the first season is. And there's so much, that Kate can attest.
Yeah, I think we at some point we paused it and we were having a discussion about something that was happening, and I looked at the timestamp on the screen and I was like, oh, so we have 40 minutes left of this movie and we just had another scene of exposition.
Yes.
Explaining what the heck is going on.
And I think it's funny because the series is written in a very classic, episodic, but I will say that the fact that there were 3 seasons, I think, and now this is complete speculation, but this is the way my brain is putting it together, and the way that the series was written, and the fact that they were going to make the movies 3 at a time. It's a trilogy, right? It is a trilogy. Mm-hmm. And the classic way that a trilogy is written, this is an analogy that I am really bad with names, so I don't know the names of anyone, but I'll try to describe to you who these people are. And people will laugh at me that I don't know people's names. The director of the second Star Wars film once gave the analogy of a good trilogy, and he was talking about Star Wars, but it's not just Star Wars, it's how to write a series of 3 things, is like a piece of music. So you have the first movement, the exciting opening. There's lots of action. It's usually pretty fast. You're hearing things you've never heard before. It introduces the theme of the entire piece.
Yes.
And if it's written well, it's exciting, it's new, and it pulls you in. The second movement is always the slow movement, right? Mm-hmm. That's the really slow emotion. It's where you dig into the emotional meat of the story that you're telling through music, of the story you're telling. It's, and then the third movement is the finale. It's loud, it's bombastic. We built the world in the first movement. We understand it now because of the second movement, and now the big, beautiful conclusion is what we're rolling towards. And he used that as an analogy for that is how you write a good trilogy. The films should be the same way. The first one introduces the world. The second one gives us the emotional depth. It's not necessarily going to have as much action, but it's what builds character. It's what builds story. It's what motivates the story. And then the third one is the finale. That's what takes us home and wraps up the story. And it can move fast and furious and dirty because we totally understand the world we're living in and we can just run to the end. And so all good trilogies are built that way. If it's a really well-written trilogy, that is the formula that it follows. I think that Avatar, both the animated series and this movie, followed that. They were trying to follow that formula. We're building a world. We're pulling you in. We've introduced characters and we've kind of helped you figure out who they are. We know which camp you're in. Are you in the good camp or the bad camp? And then we understand the world. We understand the rules that govern that world. And we have an idea of where our story is going. And then the second movement is going to be, this is why I'm so mad that people trashed this film and they didn't let him make the next 2 films. Because that is the film where you've pulled people in and you can start developing your characters and you can start bringing in the emotional weight. And then the third, as we know from the series, is the big bombastic finale where you have... there is a very Darth Vader moment in, this changing of a good character or a bad character into a good character. They have that in Airbender, right?
Yes.
A lot of this series reminds me of Star Wars, right? That I think that he was wanting to follow that with these live action films. And I think, I heard a lot of critiques of like, characters are missing, characters were underdeveloped. I didn't like the way this person was portrayed. And I'm like, if you try to develop every character in an hour and 40 minutes, you end up with a big pile of underdeveloped characters that no one cares about, and I don't understand why I'm watching this. And I think that that's actually something, when you said you were missing the humor, I think you can pull the humor into the second film. When you think about Star Wars, that's the funniest film. That's where all of the really great moments come that aren't gags, that aren't slapstick, but the humor is there, right? And I think that we would have gotten a lot of the stuff that people wanted from this first film and they didn't get because they were watching it through the lens of, I have seen this entire story. I have consumed all 36 hours of this story, and I'm angry that this hour and a half doesn't give me everything I've ever loved about this one character in this amount of time.
Yes.
So I just think it's so unfair, because when you look at how do you tell a trilogy story well, I think all the elements were there for setting us up for having a really entertaining, well-made trilogy.
Exactly. They were setting it up, and no one gave them a chance to finish this 3-course meal.
Yep.
And you just got left with the salad. You didn't even get the main
you complained so much about the dang salad.
You didn't get it.
You showed up
You
and you
didn't
were
get
like, I
the
don't
steak.
even like salad. I'm leaving. And then the waiter came in with the steak and there's no one there. He's like, I got the steak. What? I got like a 12-layer wedding cake in the back. With like fireworks built in. And you just left because you didn't like my salad.
I like it.
And it all brings us back to, like, this film had to try to please this great big fandom, but its focus was for new people like you, Laura, who watched the film and then watched the series. Or you, Kate, this is your first, time watching this movie, and you've only seen snippets of the original, and you even said that you want to watch the series now.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally piqued my interest.
Because this world is so cool.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was a showcase into this world, into this story, and I think they would have been able to, especially with Zuko. Goodness gracious. The best part of this movie was Zuko and Iroh. Like, just give me a whole movie of them, please.
I love Dev Patel.
Let's talk about that for a second, though, because first of all, Dev Patel.
He's so great.
Period. The end. Wrap it up. The fact that you all hated on Dev Patel makes you dead to me. Like, just leave.
Right.
You can leave. Iro, however the heck you want to pronounce it, this film decided they were going to use Eastern pronunciations of names for some reason instead of extremely Western actors going "ang" for names, and they decided to say "ong" and Avatar and whatever. Iro, Uncle Funny, whatever you want to call him.
Uncle Funny.
When you first introduced to him, if you have watched the series, you're a little bit like, what? Because he's not like the Santa Claus of Avatar, which is what he is in the, he's this jolly, fat, weird guy, just like,
that's about it.
That like poor Zuko's trapped on a boat with this fool is kind of what you feel like. And because they have 36 hours of time to develop that character, he goes through a very slow transformation, and that's part of, that's drawing in, it's like kids discovering who their parents are and that they're not just their weird mom and dad. They're like, oh, they're actually really smart, wonderful, important people that are really strong and have been trying to teach me important lessons, and I just threw tea in their face. Like, this is, I'm an idiot kind of thing. But anyway, he is introduced as much more of a, like, he's got dreadlocks, he's thin, and he's a little bit more of, like, a sensei kind of,
like the wise man.
He's like Mr. Miyagi a little bit. He's a little bit more like wax on, wax off kind of guy.
Yes.
And a little less silly. They added little pieces, and it was funny because there's a moment where he's getting a foot massage, and Kelly was like, "Why is he getting a foot massage?" And I was like, "Well, that's an homage to him." I'm pretty sure that at some point in the series there was an image of Uncle Iro like drinking tea and getting a massage. And so they peppered those little pieces of his character in there, but they needed him to be more of a serious sensei father figure because of what they needed him to do, right? He balances, he's like the spiritual person in this too. Like, he makes a big deal out of honoring the gods, and when he meets Aang for the first time, and Zuko's like, "You're my prisoner," ugh. And Iroh's just like, "It is an honor to meet you." Like, he is set up right away of like, he is very different than any of these other Fire Nation people.
Which is another part which I found interesting of the many different changes and things that they made, was that they focused, even the grandmother, Katara and Sokka's grandmother at the beginning, describes the Fire Nation for the first time and says, but they do not follow the spirits, or the Fire Nation does not honor them. And that is how the Fire Nation is described. Yeah. And so when Uncle Iroh is the only one who really is a person in the Fire Nation honoring the spirits, an audience member can go, oh wait, what? Yeah. There's more nuance here than just all the Fire Nation people want to kill the spirits or whatever,
Yeah, I loved their casting. I loved their dynamic. I liked both of they were clearly the strongest actors in the film as well.
Iroh and
a few
Zuko.
Of the other adults, like the waterbending master I thought he was he was in it for a very small period of time. He did a great job. I loved the actress who played grandmother. She's old as the hills. She was in the Ten Commandments.
Oh my gosh,
she played
no
Moses'
way.
mom in the Ten Commandments.
No way.
So you can't forget that voice anywhere. But yeah, I mean, I think that's another piece of this that was hard, is when you're developing characters and you had little actors that maybe are still honing their acting skills, a la Harry Potter. When you go back and watch the first Harry Potter film, the acting is like a bad Community theater. It's thank God Maggie Smith was there to save the day, because those three little actors look like they are reading cue cards off they're to the, I don't know, what
Chamber of Secrets!
To the Chamber of Secrets! I'm gonna play Chancellor Expelled! Their acting is just atrocious.
Yeah,
and they grew into better little actors. And I think that's, and now I'm jumping all over the map here, but again, it's unfair they didn't get to make the next one. They set themselves up to be able to give the actors time to grow. They were going to let them physically age. They, Sozin's Comet was going to arrive in 3 years.
Yeah.
Which was giving them time to, first of all, allow their child actors to be able to age without it being weird. Okay, 1 month later, and Aang has gone through puberty. Right. That'd be weird. And then it also gives the time for the characters to physically mature, which is something I would like to touch on either at some time in this conversation, Kelly, about the importance of, when you're trying to broaden the audience of a story, being very cognizant of the age of your characters is really, really, really important.
Absolutely. Especially for live action versus animated. Because animated, I can watch, 12-year-old Aang in one show, and then 12-year-old Dipper in Gravity Falls. It's age is meaningless in some respects, because they will take it in different, take a different lens to whatever age, depending on the show.
And that you very often forget the age of animated characters.
Yes.
You theoretically know, but the characters get to do whatever they want. They get to do adult things because they're an animated thing. You don't really can't tell.
Yeah.
And the joke that I kind of told Kelly is, I'm like, okay, so they wanted to market this to adults, and spoiler alert, there's some romantic elements that come, and they're obviously, they let Sokka and Yue have that little bit of romance in this one. Adults don't want to watch 12-year-olds be romantic with each other. Right. It's uncomfortable. It's not romantic for adults.
No.
And actually a little inappropriate.
Yes.
There's a reason that that's considered that's what makes it a children's film, is if you have younger characters. We don't watch, my parents didn't watch Lizzie McGuire, and think oh, it's so romantic. No, ew, weird. And so if they wanted this to be for adults, that's why Sokka was cast as a 25-year-old actor, because no one wants to watch a 15-year-old boy be romantic with someone. That's maybe 15-year-olds, but this wasn't for 15-year-olds. It was a darker adult film.
Yes.
And that allowing the characters who have romances coming in the future to get a little bit older and mature a little bit more, I think would add to that ability to tell the story in a way that is more interesting for adults. Because once you hit the 16, 17, 18, then you're kind of in Twilight range, right? Where it's it's fine. You can cast adults and they'll maybe believe that they're 17. It's fine. Yeah. But you can't have I mean, no adult wants to watch 12-year-old Aang be like, I like Katara. You know, like, that's not like, what? And this little actor who played Aang was so cute. That it's like, I just would have been like, ew, no.
Yeah, especially compared to, like, Dev Patel, who was maybe, like, 19 or 20 when they filmed this. Mm-hmm. Like, he looks like a tiny little boy.
He looks like a teeny bopper.
Yeah, he looks like a teenager. I liked his casting. I thought he was cast really, really well.
Absolutely.
They aged him up just enough. I think actually Sokka's acting and costuming made him appear younger as well. Yeah. I know that he was 25, but you could have easily told me that his character was somewhere from 17 to 19 and I would have believed it.
Yeah. Right.
Which also makes sense to me. Like, I know that was something I always struggled with in the animated series would be like, especially was the fact that they didn't let Sokka get like taller. They kept him, he's like, hi, Dad! And he's like up to his dad's shoulder, and then he's like, I am a warrior, fight! And I'm like, I don't care how talented you are not taking down, like, adult males if you're up to your dad's shoulder and your arms are still super skinny. Like, that's, like, the realism aspect there of, like, but when it was in the series, it didn't matter because they're animated, right? But here it's like, if we really want to believe that everyone's bending and Sokka's just punching people, he needs to be a little bigger and older.
Right.
Because
it's true.
I don't think that a 15-year-old boy could take down an old man.
No.
Anyway, sorry, I got off on a tangent there.
It's okay. That was a good tangent. Okay, now I really want to go back to the style of the film, the way it was stylistically directed, and compare that to the series, because I think it is another way in which myself, as a fan of the series, looks at it and is like, this is not the same, but it was a specific directing choice, and again, needs to be looked at as such and as like a different interpretation. So the series is directed in a way and is stylistically shot, animated in the realm of like a Wild West film, basically. Like, they're going, the world and the characters and everything is like based off of like Asian cultures, but the way in which it's done, you know, they're going through towns and like there's like these like face-offs. It's all very Wild West. That's how the style is. With this film, Laura was pointing out so many different ways in where they actually focused more on like, you know, martial arts style, you know, film, and they did like all these really sometimes awkward, super close-ups of people's faces and things like that, which is another way in which, you know, they're just so different, and then your mind is going, wait, this isn't the same thing that I was watching before.
Yes. I will say Avatar is like the series, they use like a Wild West storytelling style. They have drawn on what I would consider like classic fantasy story elements, right? So what is world building? So classic fantasy sci-fi world building. And then they use anime style to tell the story. It's not an actual anime, but there's definitely things.
Yes.
I'm not even a huge consumer of anime, but you can see the little things of like,
oh yes,
whenever there's like a still screen of someone doing something, or like someone, like the way that a character will portray emotions on their face, and their eyes just become little slits, right?
Exactly.
So they used an anime style to tell this story that was written in the, you know, form of a Wild West and used traditional fantasy sci-fi elements.
Yes.
And I think when they went to make the live action film, they used the sci-fi fantasy elements, that classic trilogy storyline. But I think, you know, in wanting to make this live action and make it real world, unlike just being, you know, instead of just being like a cosplay version of the show, they decided, okay, I don't know anything about this. I am assuming. This is what I would say. They said, we want to make an animated series. This is the story. And we want to use this Japanese Asian style to tell the story. We want to pay homage to that because it's really inspired us and we like it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the version of animation that's used in that part of the world and that's popular there. So I would say the parallel is, okay, we're going to make a live action story that has, like, it's a very Western story. It has a lot of sci-fi fantasy elements that are kind of based in European and Western culture. And because it's live action, what if instead of paying homage to anime through live action, we pick the live action version of filmmaking in that culture and pay homage to that, which is the samurai film.
Yes.
And so I actually, like, how cool is that, actually? That they're like, we're going to use what inspired this series to inspire the film. And so we're going to make an Asian Japanese style film. I apologize for generalizing the term Asian. It's just a habit. I shouldn't do it. A Japanese style film with this story. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so cool. I also, as I said before, love samurai films.
Yes.
I love Jean-Claude Van Damme. I love Bruce Lee. I watch a lot of 70s samurai films. And so for me, I was able to pick up on a lot of those elements. A lot of those, Kelly, like you said, really long sweeping shots. Action sequences that aren't just cut, because no one's actually fighting. It's like, look at how stunning this fight choreography is. This is actually the beautiful part of this film, is how talented these martial artists are.
Yes.
We're just going to do this big-ass long shot of them doing all this awesome martial arts.
Right.
It's cool. I think that's really cool that they did that parallel of, like, it's a Western story using an Eastern style of animation, and so let's make a live-action Western story using the Eastern style of filmmaking, which is samurai film.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a great transition into the choreography. The fight choreography is one of the best parts about this film that I think a lot of people sweep under the rug because it's not experienced in the same way as the show, as that anime style. It's different. And even I had a hard time watching it sometimes because it's like they would do these the bending and all of that. They use martial arts. Just like in the show, they use actual martial arts movements to create the bending. So each type of bending has a different martial art attached to it. And in normal live action movies, and my biggest comparison is like the Avengers, right? So you've got a fight sequence and they're all CGI and it's just little shots spliced together and put together to make this fight scene. In this movie, what is very different, which is like more, that samurai movie directing style, is those one big long sweeping shot of the entire movement, which is to highlight this 12-year-old child who is doing this martial arts for real in front of you. And it doesn't quite connect because we're also used to, Western Hollywood Avengers style fight sequences. And it's not.
That are unrealistic, right? And that real people can't do this. And I think that that's one of the things that's really neat about martial arts films. And what's cool about this is that the very first big bending sequence, Kelly actually looked at me and said, I'm underwhelmed by the bending.
Yes.
Because it was martial arts movement with like earth and air flying around it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't super actiony. There wasn't a lot of like cut, boom, bang.
Right.
It was quieter. But I think that that's one of the things that was cool about that choice was that it tied into the spirituality of martial arts, of the like gaining enlightenment, right? That if you are so in control of your body, you're so in tune with nature, and that it's these beautiful, unbelievable movements, so beautiful. Like, it doesn't have to be boom pow crazy, I just had a seizure because everything is moving so quickly. It's just like, look at how beautiful and powerful this movement is.
Absolutely. And I just had the biggest thought, which is like, if this film was done like on stage, I would have a different view of it versus seeing that same scene in the movie just now. Like, but that's the kind of mindset that I think is helpful to like to appreciate what you're watching on film, because we're so used to, as an American audience, watching a live action film and getting like all of this just nothing but visual like stimulation of all sorts, like completely overwhelming. And then you watch this and it is slower and is focusing on the movement. Well, just think like, what if that was on a stage? Like, I'm just thinking, if this was like a stage production and I was watching everyone do all of these martial arts movements, like they wouldn't even need to have CGI and I'd be impressed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, you know, and I was just kind of giving a running narrative while we were watching it. And just the entire, like the battle at the end, the battle in the Northern Water Kingdom, that they'd be like running past, and it's very clear that this is not like CGI characters rolling around in the background. Like, there are about 100 people doing very intricate martial arts choreography.
Yes.
In full costume in the background of these scenes. And it's like, okay, and all that's happening is like the three main characters are running by. Mm-hmm. Think of the time and the talent to choreograph every single one, because that's not just kick and move around. Mm-hmm. Every single one of those people has had very safety specific, this is exactly your choreography happening in the background of those scenes. If any of you are theater or movie people listening to this, you know how difficult fight choreography is. It's something that a lot of people just don't even like to do on stage because it's so difficult. So all of this unbelievable, beautiful choreography that is not CGI, that is not spliced together, it's like we are full on doing this big, long choreography sequence, and it's in the background of a shot. We've got 100 people doing different, intricate choreography in the background of a shot, let alone the unbelievable choreography that the main characters do, and that 12-year-old boy does completely himself. And Kelly, I know you researched him. I did a little bit too. I think we need to mention how unbelievable that little actor was.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. He was a Taekwondo artist and has like a black belt. And what I love about his story is that he shaved his head even before the movie because like it would get in his way when he's fighting, right? And everyone would call him Aang because he looked like Aang. And then of course he gets cast as Aang. And he was a fan of the series, and when he heard that they're like making the live action, he and his like Taekwondo instructor just sent in a video of him, you know, doing what he does best and landed the role. And he went to only 1 month of acting school before they filmed. It shows, but like you said, like who knows how much better he could have gotten over time through the next two movies.
But I also think that as kind of little as I know about the series, I feel like he captured the essence of the character really well. He was a 12-year-old boy. He just had that kind of playful innocence about him. And I thought he did, even with more of the kind of emotionally heavy parts, I thought he kind of captured what was needed for it. And I thought he did a good job.
His emotions were honest.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell. Yes. It's like he's thinking about something that has made him really sad when he's supposed to be sad. And I think that you could tell, because I have seen a lot of films with actors that they get cast in the film and then they're like, oh, and then I read the book. You know, like even Viggo Mortensen said that when Kate and I were watching a interview with a bunch of Lord of the Rings cast people, that he's like, oh, I got cast as Aragorn and then I started reading the books. You know, and it's more about the job, right? I mean, yes. I get the job and then I research the character. And I think you can really tell that this, and I think it's special, this little boy was a fan of this series. He really knew who Aang was. You know, he, I think, really believed in the story and really loved the character and was kind of living this dream of like, I can't believe that I get to be Aang. You know, you can tell that in his, as someone who his whole life was martial arts. You know, when you research him online, he was homeschooled. All he did was martial arts, right? And that to be able to live your dream that way of like, I'm this little 12-year-old boy who you watch it and you watch all of these adults that he is doing this choreography with, and there is not a stunt double. It is really him doing all of it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like that alone, it's like, okay, forget about the interpretation, forget about the storyline. You can hate on it. There is no way that you can watch this film and watch that little boy do that choreography and be like, this is bad. Like, no, it's freaking not. He's amazing. He is amazing. And the choreography in this film is amazing. The end.
That's right.
Cut print.
Don't hate on a 12-year-old boy.
Don't hate on a 12-year-old
He's better than you at everything.
Oh, yeah. Talking again about inspiration and drawing inspiration from real world and some of the choices that they made, instead of it just being a cosplay of, you know, here's an exact copy of what, you know, the animated set looked like.
Right.
I thought that it was really cool that, you know, each of the different tribes had a different part of our world that inspired it. So
Yes.
the Fire Nation is India. And then all of the architecture was very Indian. Like in the background, there's a scene where the Fire Lord is talking to someone, I don't even remember, but I think he's talking to Azula maybe. But he's in front of a window and you just see like all of this beautiful Indian-inspired architecture in the background. Mm-hmm. Again, world building. And then you get to the air temples are very clearly like Tibetan. You know, they were always kind of modeled after monks anyway, the airbenders and the air tribes, the air nomads, I should say, sorry. Yeah. But that when you see, because we go to 2 air temples in the live action in The Last Airbender, they go to the southern and the northern.
Northern, yes.
Southern and the northern. And they have, you know, it's very Tibetan-inspired architecture. They have the prayer wheels that are a big part of like Tibetan culture and are in every town in Tibetan culture. You know, that the entire idea that they're up on top of and that was, I mean, that inspired the animated series as well, but they took it even farther by making it a little bit more realistic and really drawing on details from these cultures that inspired each of the lands. You know, I loved the Earth Nation as they kind of traveled through. They skipped a lot of the going village to village, but they had a very short montage where they visited different places. And there was, so obviously kind of inspired by like Asian places, but at some point we were in kind of an African area and we had sort of an African tribe represented, and the architecture was a little different. The 2 different water tribes being, you know, the southern water tribe had more of like an Inuit kind of feel because they're not as developed. They're not living in this big, you know, they're more nomadic kind of. Yeah. And so they pulled on kind of this Inuit-inspired type of thing. And then you go to the northern water tribe, and that was very obviously inspired by Norse culture and Scandinavia. So those little pieces that they incorporated into the architecture, the costuming, the casting, I know, you know.
That's definitely the next thing that we need to talk about.
Yes. But I thought that was actually really kind of cool. I know some people hated on it, but it's every single one of these characters isn't necessarily going to be, you know, they chose to make different choices to make it seem like our world and not just the world of Avatar.
From my understanding, all of the nations, all the elemental nations in Avatar Last Airbender are representing 4 different nationalities, and they pull from different places in the series. So they're just expanding it even more in the live action and taking inspiration from many other different cultures. Yeah. So we cannot end the podcast and get to our conclusions until we talk about the casting, because like I mentioned, that is a huge part of why a lot of people didn't like the live action version, because the animated series is focused on a lot of Asian cultures, and then this film has a whole bunch of white actors playing lead roles. And here's what I have to say. First off, yes, they could have done a lot better. Not gonna lie, not gonna sugarcoat that at all. Like, a lot of films and adaptations, especially of things like this and, like, you know, anime adaptations and stuff like that, they whitewash so much. But, and I'm not, like, giving them an out, but I am saying they did a lot better than a lot of other adaptations, and a lot better than they could have done, because they have so many background characters. Like, almost all of the extras are, like, people of color, and you know, so basically, yes, they could have done better, but they could have done worse is what I'm trying to say.
100%. I will point out the director is a person of color right off the bat. The leader of this project, the person who wanted to make this for his children, was a person of color. I agree that, yes, is it a little weird when the Southern Water Tribe is cast as all Inuit extras, and then the three main people are very clearly white Americans?
Yes.
It's a little weird, but I don't know. There's no but. I don't know why I said
but. I'm really, really hoping that if we ever get the Netflix series adaptation, that I'm sure they will do an even better job with that. Of the 23 credited speaking roles, more than half are Asian, Pan-Asian actors of Korean, Japanese, and Indian descent. So there you go. So take with that what you will. More than half of the credited speaking roles. That's a step forward. Okay, it could be better, but great.
We still have a long way to go,
but
it's a baby step.
Yeah.
Especially at a time when baby steps were not really being made.
Exactly. In conclusion, for me, I will say watching The Last Airbender was not as much of a rip the Band-Aid off experience that I was fearing it would be. It was enjoyable. It brings more to the table. Again, Zuko and Iroh are everything, even in this adaptation. Will I be watching it again? Probably not. But I'm glad I watched it.
This being kind of my first big exposure to the series of Avatar, my takeaway is that it just really, like, piqued my interest in watching the series. I can see where these arguments are coming from, and I can, clearly see the validation behind that. And I think for me, kind of the things that I was most impressed with was all the technical elements with the CGI, with the fight choreo. And so, and I enjoyed really watching with you guys, people who were fans of the series. There were times that we paused and I would ask questions and you filled me in, and I kind of got a better understanding of the story and where it was heading, and I think that was really helpful. I don't think if I was watching it on my own, I maybe would have picked up on some of those things, nor would it necessarily have been something, not having watched the series, I don't think it would have been something that I would have watched just on my own, like scrolling through Netflix or something. So, so like I said, technical elements were really cool, and I'm, like, excited to watch the series now. So add it to my ever-growing list of things that I need to watch.
Yes. Good. We've converted you.
My conclusion is a message for fans everywhere of all different films, stories. I would like to say, being a fan of something does not give you ownership over a story. It does not give you ownership over an experience. And liking something at a different level than someone else does not invalidate someone else's like of that thing.
Yes!
For those of you who live and breathe the Avatar fandom, I am happy for you. I am happy that you have found something that brings you joy.
Yes,
that this
truly.
is a story that you connected with, that means so much to you that you want to live in this world all the time. That is great. That does not mean that the message of the story, who the characters are, don't resonate with other people, and that just because another person doesn't experience something the same way that you are, that doesn't mean that they can't enjoy it. it can't mean something to them, and that the story doesn't have something to teach them. So before you slam an interpretation, before you come down on someone who doesn't know every detail of every character because they said, I like this thing, and you're like, no, you don't, I do. Just remember that at the end of the day, what this stuff is supposed to do is bring people joy. It's supposed to teach you a lesson, and it's supposed to bring you joy, and that what happened here is a potentially really wonderful film series that could have brought people into the world of Avatar, a world that the fandom absolutely holds so dear. There are people who will never get to experience that because you decided that you didn't think it was good enough. I think it was good enough. I think that it brought me into the world of Avatar. I enjoyed it for what it was, and I hope that if you're listening to this because you thought it was going to be about Avatar and you were ready to throw yourself off a cliff because I've just destroyed your life, I apologize, but I will say that I hope that you think about being a little bit more open with how people enjoy the things that you enjoy them.
Amen. Absolutely to everything you said. All fans are important to the fandom, even those that may have, like Kate, only watched The Last Airbender. And
Right.
that is your introduction to the entire world.
Yeah.
And you're a valid fan, Kate.
Thank you. I feel validated, guys.
So I hope that this episode gives everyone a new perspective on The Last Airbender, the famously
Infamous. The infamous live action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
rated as one of the worst films ever.
Only 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. Oh boy.
Yeah, and I stand by what I said before watching this. The Full Metal Alchemist live action movie is worse, so watch that if you think The Last Airbender is bad. You watch that and you get back to me and tell me how bad you think that The Last Airbender is now. But I hope it gives you a new appreciation for that film. I know talking with Laura, this has definitely changed my perspective, and yes, without you, Laura, and your story of this being your gateway into the world of The Last Airbender, I wouldn't have given it another chance, and I never would have looked at it in a positive light at all. So thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. I'm so glad we got to talk about it.
Yes. All right. That's all we got,
That's
folks.
all.
So go rewatch it and try again.
Or potentially watch it for the first time.
Yeah. If you've never watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you're not, an anime fan and that never appealed to you, maybe you should watch this adaptation, The Last Airbender, and it might make you want to watch the whole thing.
I think you should do it. If you haven't watched one or the other, if you haven't watched either, go watch it. Go check it out. At the end of the day, you just spent an hour and 45 minutes watching Dev Patel dance around on the screen. So it
Yeah.
can't be that bad.
Worth it.
Worth it. Okay, thanks guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. Again, I can't thank all of our patrons enough for making this podcast possible. If you'd like to support the podcast and vote for upcoming episode topics, you can become a part of the Fanimated crew for only $1 a month over at patreon.com/Fanimated. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Fanimated Podcast to stay up to date with all things animated, and don't forget to leave a rating and review telling us what you'd like us to watch next. The music is provided by Purple Planet Music, and the art is done by myself. You can find me on Instagram at CandorDraw. That's KANDERDRAW. Thank you so much to Laura and Kate for joining me today for this episode. This month has been super fun, releasing episodes every single week. I really hope that we can do this more regularly in the future, but for now, we're gonna go back to our bi-weekly episode schedule, so we'll talk at you in a couple weeks, and in the meantime, stay tuned and stay animated.
I will say that if you could take one thing that they changed and say it was 100% for the better, it was getting rid of Zuko's ponytail.
Ooh.
We didn't have to deal with weird ponytail Zuko. We got hot Zuko the whole time.
The whole time. Woo!
Yay for hot Zuko.
Agreed.
Excuse me while I go watch the rest of Dev Patel's filmography.